Welcome to the Happy Dog, Happy Human podcast, where we explore the intersection between human mental health and our relationships with dogs. This is Sharon.
And I'm Angela. In season 2, we're exploring social and cultural phenomena that impact our well-being so we can reduce stigma and challenge the status quo, while also learning better ways to care for ourselves and our dogs throughout the journey. We hope you love it.
Hi, everyone. This is Angela.
Hey there, it's Sharon, and today we are going to talk about toxic positivity in the context of our relationships with dogs. So last episode, we talked about toxic positivity, and this is a phenomenon in which we think about emotions or feelings as either good or bad, and we really pay attention to the positive feelings while we ignore or minimize or dismiss or otherwise just don't make room for uncomfortable feelings like grief and anger or despair and depression and things like that. And so, it impacts our relationships, which we explored last time. And today we're going to look at specifically how it comes up in our relationships with dogs.
Sounds really good. Thanks for the great recap. I think you summed it up really well there.
Thank you.
And I guess we always like to start with some breathing before we get into the topic.
Yeah, I'd love that. Let's take a few breaths. That was really nice.
Yes, always.
So I want to ask what you think about this, Angela. Do you think that dogs engage in toxic positivity?
So that's really interesting. And yes, I think they can actually. And I think the way that they can do that is that I think that they put on happy faces sometimes, dogs. I think because they care so much about us, that maybe they like will put on a smile in their own doggy way to get what they need from us.
Yes. Yeah, that makes me think of Muggins. Muggins engages in like a lot of appeasement behaviors, especially if I'm like frustrated with something or mad about something. Muggins will like be really cute. Like they'll come over to me and like wag their tail and be really silly and like it seems like they're trying to cheer me up or like distract me out of it.
Yeah, and it's funny because we're talking about toxic positivity, right? So like where's the toxic part? Because I think that's sort of what we were focusing on last week. So just interesting to think about that. I think about like when I come home and the dogs are very excited to see me, but what's really underneath that is that they are just really glad that I didn't leave them forever.
Yeah.
And but they seem very happy, but also like anxiety is also kind of driving that, right? Oh,
yes.
we have a cat.
Hello, Boofa.
Sorry, guys. Cats are more destructive than dogs, apparently. Sorry about that. So yeah, so I think like that's an example. And I guess the toxic part behind that and what, answering my own question is that that's not necessarily what they're really feeling. And maybe what they're needing is more like reassurance, like I'm not gonna leave you again, or reassurance for their own anxiety instead of I'm really happy to see you. Aren't you glad that I'm so happy to see you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. It's like they're behaving in a way that seems really happy and it makes us happy a lot of times when we're like, oh, my dog's
Mhm.
so happy that I'm home. It feels really good to be like missed, or to know that someone's glad I'm here. And um and we're not, maybe the dogs aren't like focusing so much on displaying the anxious part or the scary part of having been left, and they're focusing more on the just the happiness that we're back.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I always kind of joke when I come back if I leave Duchess at home alone. Like she always acts like I abandoned her for like 20 years.
Mm,
And actually it's like not it's really not happy the way that she acts. She screams like a monkey. I only hear her in those situations like that.
interesting.
And she I always say, Duchess, I didn't abandon you again, like as a joke.
Mhm.
But that is really what's underneath it, right? Like that's the underneath emotion that she's displaying.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah.
So
Hmm.
so that's how I think that's one way. Do you think there are any other ways that dogs engage in toxic positivity or display it?
Hmm. Well, I think we as humans interpret things as positive with dogs. And it's like could partially be like coming from them, but also it's our response to them. But I'm thinking about how people will say their dogs are so stoic, right? Like the dog is in pain, but they don't really show it, because they'll still try to um play or run, like even if their leg hurts, or they'll still, like go for the walk or do the things that we ask of them, even if they don't feel well.
That's also interesting because it brings up for me that animals often in the wild that they also, when they're in pain, they don't actually show that they're in pain, but that's a way to protect themselves, right? Or they'll
Mhm.
like go hide.
Yeah.
Um, especially noticed that with and dogs definitely do it as well. But I noticed it with my barn animals are like that. Like
Hmm.
you'll never know that they're really in pain. It's very hard to tell because they can't show weakness, which
Oh,
is
wow.
interesting because that's also, I mean, toxic positivity is it's a human phenomenon, right?
Hmm.
Like a cultural phenomenon, but in a way, like maybe it comes from that also, the need to show strength and not weakness so you don't get eaten by
Mm,
a predator.
wow. Yeah. I think for wild animals, that definitely makes sense that, like, especially when they are in social situations, that they can't be vulnerable,
No, no. So that's kind of an interesting way to think of things. And I think like domestic animals maybe continue to do that to some degree also.
Yeah. I think also there's the other part of like, what are we noticing and what are we
Yes,
recognizing as pain? Um,
absolutely.
like, because like those signs can be really subtle, but they are also present.
Yeah, and then maybe what you were mentioning before, the toxic positivity in it is that we're interpreting their very subtle cues that they are not feeling well as like, oh well, look how stoic they are, or
Mhm.
look how brave, strong,
Mm, yeah,
whatever they may be feeling.
right, right. And I've also heard people say like, um, oh, dogs don't know that they're sick. They don't know that they have cancer, so they do so much better with the treatment, for example,
Oh my gosh, people say that? I'm sorry,
Oh,
my
yeah.
face just dropped. I didn't realize people say that.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, yeah, I had a dog who had cancer and we treated her, our dog Gabby, and that's what people would say. And I was like I
That's a
get it.
horrible thing to say.
Yeah. Like the dogs obviously they don't have the vocabulary to be like, I have cancer, but I think they know when they're not feeling
Oh,
well.
for sure. Absolutely. They're in
Yeah.
pain or
Right.
yeah, they know what's up, and
Yeah.
so do their counterparts if they have other, animals around them. They also are aware that they're not doing well.
Yeah. I think what people meant was that like the dog doesn't know the prognosis, right? They don't
Right.
know what this really means or that their life is threatened or like humans do. Like we can imagine like, oh, this isn't going to go well or this is a terminal illness or and that like mindset or that knowing affects our how we feel and then our ability to
Yeah.
actually like fight the disease.
Yeah, which is what partially what we were talking about last week as well. I think we mentioned people with cancer and diagnosed with cancer, how it's common for people to say you need to have a positive mindset, that's how you fight it, that's how you get through it. And that's also like toxic, can be toxic because people diagnosed with cancer, I can only imagine, have a million different feelings going on, and they're not just all positive all the time,
Yeah.
and are probably going through a roller coaster and wave of different feelings. And if there's not room for all of the feelings, that can create a lot of suffering. And I mean, we can apply that same idea to our dogs as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that makes sense. I'm curious now, like what do dogs think about in terms of like when they're sick?
Yeah, I don't know. And maybe they do know that something is like horribly wrong. Like
Yeah,
we don't know because we don't know what they think. I wish we did.
I
It would
know.
be really fun to be in their head one day,
Yeah, yeah.
especially Duchess's. What
Hmm.
the heck is going on in that dog's head?
Well, I think we imagine that they are like living in the present, right? That they're not like thinking about the past or thinking about the future. I don't agree with that. I think that dogs engage in planning. I think they have ideas. They think about things that are not in front of them. You know, they,
Absolutely. Like I can agree with that also just by observing,
yeah,
how dogs are. I
right.
also agree with that.
Hmm.
And like maybe the way that they think about things is different than the way we think about things.
Hmm.
But that's why I sort of thought like maybe if they do have a terminal illness, like they have a feeling, like they know that
Hmm.
this might be it.
Yeah, right. Like, because
We don't know.
like when you don't feel right, you can
Yeah.
tell.
Yeah. And that's not like, even for humans, when we don't feel right, it's not something we're actually like necessarily using our prefrontal cortex, like thinking, oh, it's something that we feel in our bodies, and then we say that something's not right. Like you hear people say that a lot when they're not feeling well, and it's like a guttural instinct,
Yeah.
not a head instinct, if that makes sense. I mean, I know they're all connected, obviously, because mind body connection is,
Hmm.
there's not one without the other. But
Yeah. But yeah, I think it's the guttural instinct is like something in my body doesn't feel right, and I can't like logically explain it, but I know.
yeah, exactly.
Mhm.
Well, and speaking of terminal illness, I think that this also goes into talking about toxic positivity in terms of losing our dogs or losing our animals,
Mhm.
and how people around us, um, how they respond to us when our dog has died, or a dog has terminal illness or whatnot, which we're sort of talking about that now.
Yeah. 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 It's such an interesting phenomenon with dogs passing away, um, in terms of like how people move through that grief. And I think when you said how people respond to you when your dog has died, that makes me think of how people will often ask, "Are you going to get another one?"
Absolutely. That's like the first thing people say, I think. Like, oh, well, you can get another one
Hmm.
also.
Right. Right.
Without really taking into consideration what that dog meant to them.
Hmm.
Um, and that the bond that you have with a dog is irreplaceable.
Yeah.
Another dog isn't gonna make it. I mean, that's part of our life with dogs, is that they die before we do. And if you're love living with dogs, you may have several dogs with throughout your lifetime.
Hmm.
um but each, if you talk to anybody who's had several dogs throughout their lifetime, nobody's going to say that the dog replaced the previous one.
Right.
You have a special relationship with each one. Each one has a personality.
Mhm.
Actually, you know what? I'm like giggling a little bit because I think, what's really toxically positive that I have never considered before is and I find it strange. Sorry to anybody who does this. Maybe you could tell me why you do, but
Hmm.
people who continue to get the same breed.
Oh my goodness. I know people who have named the dog the same name.
Okay.
Mhm.
Interesting. So
Yeah.
this, I mean, again, like I can't judge. I don't know what's going on. Maybe you just like the breed. Totally fair also.
Mhm.
Um, like I think actually my in-laws, they keep getting golden retrievers, but they really just like the breed.
Mhm.
They definitely, I don't think they do it as a way to sort of like push the difficult, to replace the previous one, but
Mhm.
it is an interesting idea, right?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. My parents actually had the same breed. Three,
Oh.
they had three dogs of the same breed. Oh no, four. Yeah.
Did they name them the same name?
No, they were not. They were not all the same name. Yeah.
But I mean, the reason why we're saying, I mean, I should speak for myself, but I think Sharon thinks this too, is that this is an extension of toxic positivity because it's a way to minimize, to avoid difficult feelings and not go through grief.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, bringing any new dog into the house, like right after the previous dog has died as a way to cope. Um, I think there's pros and cons, and I think it can definitely be in the realm of toxic positivity where it's like, well, I can't deal with like not having a dog anymore. It's too
Mm.
painful. So instead of, working through that, I'm just going to get this other puppy and have a distraction. And, but at the same time, like you can't, you can't also just be like, now I don't know what's happening with my life and it's over because my dog has died, and the puppy can legitimately help you through the
Mhm.
grief by like helping you maintain your daily routine and making you laugh and sometimes distracting you, so that you're not like all positive or all negative. It's like, you know.
Yeah, and that's such a dance, I feel like. Well, that's, I mean, in part why I got why we adopted Pepper and Biscuit, my new dogs, was I actually was thinking in part that, they're 3 years old, Duchess is 8, and I
Mm,
was thinking a little bit like, okay, when Duchess passes, like we will have these other two with us as well, and like
yeah.
it will make it easier. Like that was one of the reasons that I
Yeah.
had thought about it and was looking to get more dogs actually
Hmm.
before she passes, like long before, because of what you're saying. Also, I didn't want it to be complicated, but I wanted there to be like an overlap,
Hmm.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Lots of people do that. They call it a bridge
Yeah,
dog,
a
actually. Have you ever
bridge dog. Yeah,
heard
I
that?
like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's a way to like support yourself in having resources when your dog passes away so that you can maintain your daily routine and still have companionship and not have that identity stripped from you, like as being
Yeah,
a dog person or a dog owner.
yeah, exactly. And I think, I mean, I think what happens with people that are not dog owners, but maybe dog owners do it to each other too, is that they don't understand the depth of the relationship perhaps and say things like,
Mhm.
"Oh, it's just a dog. Why are you so upset? You'll
Mm,
get over it. You're still
mhm.
crying about your dog. It's been 3 years.
Yeah, a
Like,
lot of
why
people.
are you doing that?"
Yeah.
People are very like yeah, it's like toxic positivity and judgmental and critical because it's coming from a place of like not understanding, I
Hmm.
guess. And then also discomfort with the feeling of sadness.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so
Hmm.
I think that's a way for sure that we see toxic positivity happen,
Hmm.
um, unfold when there is a loss of a dog.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that the loss of a dog really like opens up a grief uh experience. in a way that's like, I think as in general, as a society, we have a hard time with grief and the frequency that our dogs pass away in our lifetime means like that wound gets open,
Mm-hmm.
at so many times. And then if a lot of people just don't know how to, it's so overwhelming, because it's like that grief can
Yeah.
remind you of other things that you have lost, like loved ones or jobs or identities or, freedoms in certain ways that it can kind of all kind of mix together and become extra overwhelming.
Yeah, and it's a floodgate of very intense feelings, and supporting people who are going through that like requires an ability to like sit with it, which we were talking about last week, and be there for someone in all of their feelings, not just the positive ones,
Right.
I think another way people deal, like another sort of toxically positive way people deal with death is they're like, or with the dog, I can imagine saying, think of all the good things that the dog did for you. Like just focus on the happy parts. That's another way that we deal with grief a lot. Like we're going to celebrate their life, not think about their death.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I think that when there are so many responses like that coming from people around you, it makes sense that you would like rush into getting another dog or get one that's the same breed and same name, because it's like, I don't have any support around here. Or there's no space for me to actually have these feelings about my dog and share that with other humans that I care about. So I need something to help me just keep going.
Yeah. It's like I always say, I don't know if I said this in the grief episode about dogs, but I really think like the grief of a dog is like such a pure sadness that you'll never feel about anything else in your life.
Yeah.
And that's very overwhelming, like you were saying, and it's overwhelming for it's big emotions and it's overwhelming, and helping support someone through that, or yourself through that without being toxically positive to yourself as well, can also be difficult, of course, very difficult. But again, it's like about having an awareness of what's going on, and trying to be able to sit with those feelings.
Right. Yeah, it's not an easy task, and it's something that you definitely need the help of other humans.
Yes, absolutely, 100%.
Yeah.
So how else do you think toxic positivity could play a role in how we relate to dogs?
Well, I'm thinking about dog behavior. So, like, one way is like that we tend to like discard dogs who don't behave in ways that we like, you know what I mean? So like having this view that like a dog who lives with you is a dog who like sleeps by the fire, like greets me when I come home. And like I go for walks and it's fun, and or plays with the kids, but then like if the dog is digging holes in the garden or chewing up your slippers or like being really reactive, or of course being aggressive in some way or biting, those are things that are like challenging to deal with and uncomfortable and bring up a lot of uncomfortable feelings for us. But it's very socially accepted to, well, in some ways, to like rehome a dog for that reason.
Yeah, totally. And I also was just thinking on top of that it's like that goes so much with this like strong desire to uphold this view of perfection of ourselves and our family or whatever it might be, of how the outside world sees us. And if dogs the dog that we live with doesn't behave in those ways, like then we want to get rid of them to like
Mhm.
gloss over it, or maybe abuse them even because we can't deal with the difficult feelings. Like,
Mhm.
and abuse can be as little, I mean, I'm guilty of this, but like yelling at them all the time,
Mhm.
swatting at them, and really not like actually helping them with their issues because of this like drive to be seen a certain way.
Yeah. And I think that you're right. There's such a parallel with us not being able to deal with the uncomfortable feelings that come up in us in response to the dog's behavior.
Yeah. And also, I mean, I think so much of that also has to do with adjusting our expectations, of course, which we will talk more
Mhm.
after the break on that.
Yeah.
Um, you said something about dogs being good for kids that play with the kids, for example.
Yeah.
In my own household, like Duchess is not that, and she never will be that, and that's okay. I don't expect her to be.
Yeah.
Um, again, why I adopted the other two was I was like, oh, okay, I also would really like to have some dogs that like Mara can have a closer, not that she has a good relationship with Duchess, but like they don't have that like super close bond because Duchess doesn't really want to be handled by her, which is great for Mara too. Like she's learned a
Yeah.
lot through her. But
Mm,
with Pepper and Biscuit, like she's able to have more of like a relationship with them. But again, that's like adjusting your expectations of like the particular dog in the particular scenario.
mm.
Um, and we can't just have like blanket expectations of what dogs should be like to
Yeah.
fit our desired like sunny outlook of what our life should be like.
Hmm. Right. Yeah. I think a lot of people, because we expect that dogs are like, especially with certain breeds, right? Like golden retrievers and labs, they're great with kids.
Hmm.
And we have these expectations, and then we start to um, praise the dog for being really tolerant of the kids, right? Like you hear people say, like, "Oh, my kid can do anything. My kid can lay on top of the dog," and you see pictures on social media, right?
Yes.
With kids hugging the dog, squeezing around their neck, laying on top of them, riding them like a horse, and the dog is being like quote tolerant unquote, and we're like seeing that as a great quality, but we're really
Yeah.
dismissing the dog's discomfort.
Absolutely. There's a great Instagram account I really like her. Her name is Dog Meets Baby, and she
Mm,
actually goes through these photos and like tries to actually point out what the dog is actually feeling.
yeah.
And she actually puts up on her stories like do you think the dog is uncomfortable, comfortable? And so people get to vote, and it's a really
Oh,
fun way
cool.
of just sort of challenging this idea of what you're describing.
Hmm.
And I see that even with Pepper and Biscuit that Duchess sets her boundaries. So that's actually easy.
Nice.
Pepper and Biscuit do not in that sense. Like Mara, other kid, we have a lot of kids around because we have a kid.
Mhm. Yeah.
They can hug those dogs
Mhm.
really tight, and the dogs won't set the boundary, but I can tell that they're uncomfortable.
Mhm.
So it actually, in an interesting way, is it does create more work for me because I need to protect them
Right.
and set boundaries for them in those situations.
Mm.
And they definitely like cuddles more than Duchess, for example, because that's just their sensory output,
Mhm.
I guess. But
Yeah,
there's also a limit. There's a boundary.
definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just like people, dogs can like have a hard time saying no to something that is uncomfortable.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. They can have a hard time saying no.
Yeah. But just
Definitely.
because they're not like explicitly saying no with like a growl or a snap or a bark, that doesn't mean, I guess that doesn't mean they aren't saying no. And it doesn't mean
Yeah.
they aren't uncomfortable either.
Yeah. Or yeah. I mean, it's hard to know.
Mhm.
This is in every dog episode. I feel like we come back to this. We're like, I don't know. But that's what I love our dog episodes because we can't pretend to know what's going on, with them, which is just that's like a beautiful like life, lesson and outlook, I think.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think it also depends on like the sensitivity of the dog and like what is Well, yeah, thinking about their like sensitivity to touch, for example, like Pepper and Biscuit, it sounds like they are not very sensitive to being touched, so they like it. But then there might be a certain point that they're like, oh, maybe I don't like it like this, or I don't like it anymore, like being hugged, for example. And then
Mm,
once you're hugging a dog, like you can't, like if you're hugging a dog and their head is like right next to your head, you can't see their
mm-mm.
eyes or their tail or, you know, these parts of their body that are going to tell you whether they're having a good time or not.
That's so true. I didn't think about it that way also. Yeah. Yeah.
Whereas a dog who's more sensitive, like Duchess and Muggins is like this, they are going to say no, like you can't even get close enough to hug me. They're going to say no at
Yeah.
that point.
Yeah. It's very explicit.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in a lot of households, people get a puppy or a dog and then they expect them to be good with the kids,
Yeah.
and they may not be
Mm-hmm.
because of varying reasons. And then they get rid of them, like you said. That happens. It's so common, right? Like at Christmas time, they get a little puppy,
Mm-hmm.
little Labrador or something, and then within the year it gets given back.
Yeah.
It's
And
unfortunately, yeah.
mhm. I mean, I've worked with dogs that have that like the family got the dog as a puppy and there were kids, right? And then I end up meeting the dog a year later. The dog is aggressive towards kids, right? And it's like, how did this happen? Like, but the puppy grew up maybe in a situation in which they didn't feel safe with the kids, or like they were
Mhm.
trying to say, I'm uncomfortable, and no one was listening. And it was just like, oh, it's a puppy. They're going to be great with the kids. So the kids can do whatever they want. And then it's like turns out to be bad experiences. And now the dog has a trauma history or a bite history um, and like isn't good with kids.
That's fascinating that I mean, of course, that makes sense that you get called at that 1 year mark if they don't
Yeah,
get given back.
right.
But also it's fascinating. So I was looking up, I got interested, I went down like a rabbit hole about pit bulls,
Oh, yeah,
just casually one of those things.
right.
And I'm not going to bring up too much about it because it's a huge debate in this world today. But what it led me to was finding out that in the United States, the second breed that most commonly leaves kids in the hospital is
Mm,
a Labrador.
uh-huh. Yeah, fascinating, right? Probably because
Yeah,
most of the homes with kids have Labradors.
exactly. But
Yeah.
that's why most of the
Hmm.
homes have kids with Labradors, and people are getting Labradors with this idea, oh, they're kid friendly and like not help facilitate the relationship between them.
Right.
And that's I mean, this is my guess,
Hmm.
and that's what leads to these issues
Yeah.
of right. And then, but that's just so interesting because like that's the dog that we think, oh, that's the one that you should get if you have a family, right?
Yeah, everybody says that. Yeah, but it's like we need to recognize that dogs are living beings and that who they become and what they're good at or not good at is just as much a part of their life experience as it is their genetics.
Yes, 100%. And I think that's why all this like breed specific generalizing is problematic also
Hmm.
because they are all individuals. And yes, I know some breeds were bred to do certain things like that. Sure,
Hmm.
why not? But
Yeah.
I think we take it a little bit too far, and it's more important to look at the individual, right? Like that's
Hmm.
also what we should be doing with humans. If we were like
Yeah.
talking about breed specifics, we're getting back into eugenics, you know?
Yeah, right.
So
I think that's always a fine line with dog breeding
yeah.
and eugenics. But yeah, like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting. Like, that has never occurred to me to be like, oh, because of this breed, they're gonna be like good in this social situation. I've never assumed that about
Well,
it.
also I've only ever gotten rescues. So, and Duchess, I know she looks like she's not a rescue, but she actually is, in her own way. So,
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah,
everyone's
like
like, is
those.
she a Bichon? I'm like, no, she is from Inglewood. She is not a Bichon, but
She's
good
an
try.
Inglewood hound.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
like breed specific generalizing doesn't really make sense when you think about how many mixed breeds are actually out there.
yeah, it just doesn't, it doesn't make sense. Um, all right. Well, should we take a break? I think this
Yeah.
might be a good spot, and then we can after the break, we are hearing from our sponsors. We will chat about ways to combat toxic positivity related to dogs, and then maybe some stuff we can learn from the dogs.
Yeah, absolutely. We will see you in a few minutes. We are so grateful to Benson's Pet Center for partnering with us on today's episode. Benson's Pet Center is a multi-generational, family-owned and operated business with 8 locations in the New York Capital Region. Benson's has the largest selection of pet food in the area. If they don't have what you're looking for, they'll even order it for you. You can bring your dog with you to pick out their favorite treats, and you can even give them a bath at the self-serve dog wash in 3 of their locations. Benson's has competitive pricing even on subscription services, and I love knowing that my dollars are supporting a local business. The customer service at Benson's is consistently unparalleled, and the staff's extensive knowledge on pet nutrition is amazing. Can't make it out to the store? No problem. Order online before 3 p.m. on weekdays, and Benson's offers same-day delivery. And curbside pickup is available 7 days a week. Benson's Pet Center, where the motto is, "We love your pets." Thank you, Benson's. Now back to the show.
Hi, everyone. We are back.
And we have a quote to help us ease into this segment. And this is an old saying that I've heard a lot, and I don't agree with it. And I think it's a great example of how we are toxically positive with dogs. The saying is, a tired dog is a good dog.
Hmm.
Have you heard of that one, Angela?
I feel like I've heard it in passing or many times randomly, but I've never really stopped to think about it, what it
Mhm.
actually meant.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, I can see how that's just toxically positive in so many ways because, a tired dog or a dog that seems to be in a exhausted mood may be exhausted due to many different things. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are tired because of a good thing.
Mm, that's a good
And
point.
also the idea of prescribing the good, the positive good word
Mm,
that we often put on dogs, like you're good or you're bad, you know.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah. It makes me think that like people want their dogs to just like be quiet and be asleep, and that's good behavior for a dog. And like giving this idea that when dogs are awake and they're not tired, that's why they engage in behaviors like digging or barking too much, or even aggression and things like that. And then you see people take action to like try to exhaust their dog. Like that's the strategy for helping the dog be good, is get them tired enough so that they'll just sleep for hours.
Yeah, and it's again like there's no room for the dog to be anything other than complacent and
Mm.
still and like an object for us,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, like an accessory, like sleeping over there by the fire, like I said
Yes.
before.
Where did you
I'm
get that
cold, so
idea?
I
Sleeping by
wanna,
the fire.
right?
That's not how I think about. Well, I guess so, in a night, maybe because Christmas is coming, like the dog
Mhm.
sleeping by the fire. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I'm cold, so I think I'm just like, where's that warm fire?
My dog will be sleeping on the couch arm
Nice.
this Christmas.
Right. Hmm.
Um, yeah, so what are some ways that we can combat this uh, this toxic positivity that we put on our dogs or relate to our dogs?
Mhm.
Um, when we're thinking back to what we were talking about before the break.
Mhm. Yeah. Well, we talked about, well, since we like this quote, we're talking about behavior, right? And so we want to make sure that we recognize that dogs are capable of behaving in good ways when they're awake, and that it's not being tired that prevents reactivity or treats anxiety or aggression, but it's like nervous system regulation, and being able to express yourself and be heard and understood, like though, and have your needs met. Like those are the things that contribute to dog happiness, or like the ability to behave in ways that we like.
Yeah, and I would love to also add to that, like for them to be able to have their full range of emotions.
Yeah, absolutely.
And one of the things that we were also thinking about is that sometimes like reactivity can mean that there's something more deeply going on. So sorry, wow, that was not said well, but there might be something more deep going on with a dog that could be, you know, pain or a medical condition. And like we were also saying before the break, a lot of times dogs don't show us in the most explicit way that there's something going on with them.
Right.
And a lot of times, like because of toxic positivity, we might brush over really helping them deal with something medical.
Yeah. So it's really important then to be able to recognize these subtle signs in our own dogs, and not like assume that it's going to be explicit, but really paying attention to how they behave all of the time, so that you can notice these subtle differences in like mood or movement or eating or playing, or things like
Well,
that.
and it can also be like related to sensitivity, of course, like sensory sensitivity. I think I have a good example with Duchess because I think until I started working with Sharon Sharon, on a more one-on-one level, and also with having Pepper and Biscuit, I didn't realize that Duchess is pretty sensitive to touch.
Yeah.
And, in the past, maybe like there's so many times where I don't even touch her and she squeaks. And I would say, Duchess, like, what? There's nothing wrong. I barely touched you.
Yeah.
And like I'm learning now more and more, there's always room to learn. I've been living with her for 8 years. That she is sensitive physically, and that it really freaks her out to sometimes even to have like somebody brush up on her. And I don't know what that might be feeling like for her, And so she's giving me those cues, which I view as reactivity or annoying, but like what's really going on with her actually is that she's experiencing discomfort.
Exactly. Yeah. Oh, that's such a great point. And I'm so grateful that you shared that, because it's so important to think about like, well, like maybe I didn't feel my arm touch you, or it wouldn't bother me if someone brushed up against me, but Duchess has a different experience. And for her, it's really disruptive or distressing in some way.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, these are just ways that it's an example of like how I've learned Duchess and how she communicates. And like this is part of understanding our dogs and like treating them within this like full realm that we're discussing. If we go back to what is toxic positivity, part of it is really creating a black and white thinking of like positive and negative. And if we want to approach our dogs in this like full range of emotion and in a nuanced way, like we want to learn what they are communicating to us in a nuanced way.
Exactly. Yeah. Which can reveal, like you were saying, underlying things that might be going on, like reactivity and anxiety can be symptoms of underlying pain. And with Muggins developed allergies this year. And I noticed that when they were feeling itchy or uncomfortable because of the allergies, they were absolutely more reactive.
Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. I'm
Yeah.
more irritable and reactive when I'm not feeling well.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Because you don't feel well. So it's like, it's
No.
not because the dog is mean or bad. It's like they're not feeling well. And so their capacity is lower than usual, right? Their tolerance is lower than usual because
Yeah.
they don't
Yeah,
feel
it makes sense.
well. Mhm.
It totally makes sense.
Yeah. But I also like how you were talking about really learning the dog and learning the nuance with how they communicate. And it's really, to me, it's so much more than learning body language. We always hear about like, learn your dog's body language. What does it mean when the tail is like this or when their ears are like
Hmm.
that? Right. But it's so much more than that. And it's really, it's not about like having a dictionary to like decode ear positions and be like, oh, every time a dog's ears look like
No.
this, it means that. It's really about getting to know your dog and
Yes.
how they communicate. And I like to expand from body language to nervous system nonverbal cues, right? Because it's not just about what their body is doing. It can also be about like, what does their bark sound like? Or how are they breathing right now? Or how are they moving around? Or are they eating or not?
Yeah, and I mean also what a fascinating way to like connect with, you know, your animals and your friends and people around you. Like
Mhm.
if we approach it in this way, it feels so exploratory and scientific in a way. And like I think that this is also healing for us and
Mhm.
positive. I was gonna use the word positive, empowering for us also,
Yeah.
you know.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Because if you're thinking about nervous system cues, our bodies also have nervous system cues and in the same categories in terms of like looking at breath and prosody of like voice and movement or like activity engagement. And it can be, I think the empowering part comes from like really knowing yourself and knowing the cues that you're seeing and experiencing and like having that confidence to be like, yeah, I know my dog is not usually like that. And I see this subtle change and I know something is off.
Totally. I think, yeah, you couldn't have said it better.
So I'm curious because one of the things we talked about before the break was like how was dogs and kids, right? And like how can we help the dogs and the kids to have good relationships, but not in a way that we're just expecting the dog to tolerate whatever the kid is doing. Um, and you are a person with kids, so I'm asking you.
Just go to that account I said earlier, dog meets baby. No, no, I actually it's she's honestly I find a very helpful account.
Mhm.
When you first start having kids, because especially if you're bringing a kid into a dog's home, baby
Yeah.
into a dog's home,
Mhm.
that's a lot for the dog. It's very overwhelming
Yeah.
for many different reasons.
Mhm.
But I think I was quite nervous with Duchess because Duchess does not usually take to kids very kindly,
Mm.
although has improved a lot since I've had a kid. So
Mm.
she now trusts them more, knows how to deal with them better, etc.
Oh, wow.
But from day one, it's just been teaching Mara that it's been teaching Mara about Duchess's cues. And there were periods that are more difficult and that you have to keep them separated because no impulse control on both sides.
Mm. Mhm.
Um, and but now, I mean, Mara's 3.5, and she says things like, "I don't like it when Duchess growls at me. Will you move her?" Like things like that. And so she's very aware of Duchess, and
Mm.
she's very aware of like petting her nicely now. And there was a point where I used to tell her just don't pet her,
Mhm.
or if you pet her, you can pet her back. So
Mm.
like there's just been a lot of work around it. And now Mara is I even tell Mara things like, if you want Duchess to trust you, then you can't be jumping all over her and near her because it
Mhm.
scares her.
Mhm.
So it's been a really great learning experience for both of them. but it needed to be very specifically facilitated.
Yeah.
And now we're in a really good spot. And I think Duchess, I said this before, I'm working with Sharon, and we're actually going to teach you the up and down game at the end of this. So I'll bring it up now. But I learned the up and down game, which is now my go-to for situations when I don't know what to do.
Nice.
And I taught it to Mara.
Mhm.
And so, she does that with Duchess. And I mean, it's a lot of trust building. It takes a lot of time.
Oh, yeah.
And it needs to be facilitated. I mean, that's all I have to say. Like,
Yeah.
otherwise you're going to end up with an issue where somebody gets hurt and it's like a real safety issue.
Mhm.
And I do want to say on here too that, like, honestly, you should never leave kids alone with the dogs, ever,
Mhm.
ever, no matter how much you trust the dog. Like, it's just, and the kid,
Mhm.
you really should never leave them alone because you don't know what could happen. And I think that's just an important, like, safety
Mhm.
thing to keep in mind.
Yeah.
But I do want to say, since we're on this topic and we also talked about rehoming,
Mm.
I do want to give an example because I have a friend who she had a dog who was very reactive, similar to Duchess. Actually, very funny because, interestingly enough, the two of them just have like a cold war between them, Duchess and this dog. I would go over and they just learned to, like, sit on opposite sides of the rooms
Mhm.
and completely ignore each other.
Oh, wow.
Sometimes you
Perfect.
put two reactive dogs together, that's what you get.
Nice.
They never fought.
Huh.
Never. They
Wow.
just sat in opposite corners and
Huh.
fully ignored. Like,
Amazing.
fully.
Nice.
Amazing, right?
Yeah. We have an
I
agreement.
thought it was really funny. Yeah, exactly. It was a Cold War agreement.
Yeah.
You sit there, I'll sit here. Don't look at me.
Mhm.
Don't even think about it. Anyway, but unfortunately, so she ended up having two kids and lives in a two-bedroom apartment that's on a busy street. And the
Mhm.
dog had a lot of reactivity and aggression issues, starting with the street being, very overstimulating, people walking by,
Mhm.
barking a lot. And then you've got two kids under two running around, grabbing the dog.
Wow.
Um, a couple incidents happened. I mean, it just was so chaotic that she ended up saying, like, this is not working. Like, it's
Mhm.
really creating suffering for the dog, for the kids. Nobody's benefiting from the situation.
Mm.
Us, the
Yeah.
parents.
Right. So
So
stressful.
yeah, it was just very stressful. And so luckily the dog got to go to her mom's, and maybe they will be able to bring the dog back home in a couple years when the kids are bigger. But I know that was a very hard decision for her because that was her first baby. Um,
Yeah.
but it got to the point where yeah, just everybody was suffering. And so I think this is one of those stories that, rehoming sometimes is appropriate.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's such a great example because we don't want to say like rehoming a dog is never what you should do, and that's like you're being toxically positive every time you do that,
Right.
right? Because every situation is different, and sometimes it's the environment and the dog are not a great fit, or sometimes things change in
Mhm.
your life that you didn't expect, or sometimes you can't change things like where you live.
Right.
And,
Right.
and so sometimes the most humane thing to do for everyone is to find a different home for the dog.
Yeah, and I mean, it's obviously devastating and very difficult to do that. So,
Yeah.
um, on the flip side though, we were talking before about people often, I think, get dogs because they think that the dog will do a certain thing. Unfortunately, I don't think it's any individual's quote unquote fault, but because of societal messaging, like what a dog is supposed to bring to a family.
Yeah.
And then within that first year, we were talking about, they start getting into that adolescence phase. And oof, that was like the hardest phase with Duchess.
Hmm.
Again, why I adopted these dogs at 3 years old, because that was right past the adolescence phase.
Very
I
smart.
was thinking, I know, I was like, there's no way I'm getting a dog younger than 3. Not
Yeah.
happening.
Yeah. Good choice.
At this point.
Yeah.
Smart decision, by the way, because these two are pretty awesome.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, because their brain is developed into an adult dog brain now, so it's just
Mhm.
easier to work with them, I think.
Mhm.
But yeah, so at the flip side too is like, don't necessarily pull the trigger on rehoming your dog, and like please get a behaviorist and a veterinary specialist and like look at the range of things that may be going on, and you
Yeah.
know they are a being also and like may need support. And
Mhm.
I think that's also about adjusting expectations. Like maybe you didn't expect that this would be life with a dog, but also you took on the responsibility. I
Mhm.
mean, it is a little bit like having kids. Like I can't send my kid back, unfortunately. I'm kidding. I'm kidding most of the time.
But you're right,
You
there's a
know.
whole range of emotions involved with these
Yeah,
little ones.
exactly. Exactly. Um, so yeah, I mean a lot of people just abandon dogs also. Like if you're gonna rehome, like please rehome. Um, my Pepper and Biscuit were just abandoned, which I find so sad. They were not rehomed. Or that was because of a move. The people that lived with them originally moved and they just left them. So,
Yeah,
you know, that to me is very, very sad also that there was no effort put into finding them a home.
yeah. That's so hard. Yeah. I think I think that's another situation too where we want to pay attention to the nuance because like um I think when people do things like that, maybe there is a desperation involved,
Probably.
right? Like they
Probably.
felt like they
Yeah.
didn't have any other choice or they didn't have the support or resources they needed to like rehome the dog. And especially like with moving, there are costs involved with living with a
Yeah.
dog, and some places don't allow dogs. And, people can really feel or be in a situation where they don't think they have any options or they don't know what the options are or they really don't have any.
Yeah, totally. I mean, that's true. Some people also put their babies at give up their babies, at
Oh,
fire
sure.
stations. So of course, like,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I think in general though, it's just like thinking about, yeah, like I wish that there were not these societal messaging around like dogs just making this like perfect cushy home, because
Mhm.
like they have their own personalities. They come with pros and cons. They come with
Yeah.
um they come with more difficult behaviors. Every dog, like every human,
Hmm.
we
Yeah,
all have something.
right.
You know?
Yeah, and it's a responsibility, like you said, like
Yes.
you're responsible for this dog and responsible for like helping them have good experiences so that they can learn and behave and be integrated into a family. And also, if it's not working, we're responsible for like making sure the dog has somewhere to go or
Yeah.
is set up
Yeah.
to succeed in the next place, whatever
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like too bad there aren't more resources. Like we have the shelter system, which is a place to take your dog if you can't keep them in your home anymore. But there's not really support from coming from the shelter to be like, well, why can't you keep your dog? Like,
Yeah, and it's
can
also
we
hard
give
though
you
because
something
they're
or help you so that you can keep the dog, or can we keep the dog for a short time and then give it back to you without making you pay, if you're like, if money is a problem.
yeah, that would actually be amazing if they could do like a more of a thorough, you
Yeah.
know, why are why are you going through this? Like, can we support you?
Yeah. Yeah. So it's like too bad that in that way, like the shelter system is not supporting the nuance involved in living with a dog.
No, and also certain parts of the world, there's an overpopulation of dogs, right? And that's also
Mm.
creates issues. The shelter systems are not able to support the population
Yeah.
of dogs coming in.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Complexity.
very complex, like
Mhm.
everything.
Yeah. So one of the other things we talked about before the break was how when a dog dies, we can find ourselves in a toxic positivity situation when other people respond by saying like, are you going to get another one? And then us feeling like we don't have support, so we just have to get another one.
Well, I think like we said this last week, and I want to say it again.
Mhm.
If you don't know how to be there for someone, it's okay to say, I don't know what to say. It's okay to sit in silence with someone. It's okay to say, this must be so hard for you. How can I
Mhm.
help you? Like, how can I support you?
Yeah.
Sometimes supporting someone through grief might look like bringing them meals. Like it could be something
Mhm.
very helping them do groceries,
Yeah.
clean up the house. Like it can be things like that.
Right.
And then other times it can be sitting with the person, hugging them while they're crying, letting them cry over the phone.
Yeah.
Um, and I think it's mostly about giving someone the space to grieve.
Right. Yeah. I think it could also be about helping, like I really like those ideas you said, like giving them meals or like offering to help clean their house or something, because those are things that people definitely do when a human family member has died.
Right.
Don't think about doing those things when a dog has died, but the person might actually need that type of stuff more when their dog died
Yeah.
because
Yeah, and also like recently, we had somebody who lost their dog in my ambassador group at Cloud Doodles. I just remembered this,
oh,
and she was struggling to pay for the cremation. So we all pitched in, like
oh,
things like
that's so
that.
cool. I love
Yeah,
that.
so that's another thing. Like it's like a funeral, right? Like sometimes it's difficult to pay for a funeral or something happens suddenly. Like
Mhm.
there's a lot of like logistical stuff that we don't consider when someone loses a dog.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm thinking also about like the daily routine aspect. Like could you like meet up with your friend for a walk so that they can still like get out and go for their morning walk, even though their dog's not there anymore?
Yeah, I think that would be so supportive. Or like, I'm sorry, I keep going back to my ambassador group, but we've had sadly a few doggy deaths in there. But
Hmm.
we also pitched in, somebody lost their dog, unfortunately, tragically recently, and we all pitched in to do a painting for the dog
Oh,
because
that's
one person
awesome.
does like edits. So, that way to memorialize the dog, like
Yeah.
you can ask someone also, like, how would you like that? Would it be nice for you to have something to remember them by, or,
Hmm.
gifting them something along those lines?
Hmm. Oh, that's such a great idea. Sounds like a really cool group that you've cultivated.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
But, and I think so much of that also is about um the reason those things I think are helpful um are because you are uh demonstrating to someone that you understand how important their
Mhm.
dog was to them. And that's
Right.
something that like we as a society often oversee.
Hmm.
Um, like the relationship with a dog, what that means
Yeah.
to somebody.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's like just saying like I see how big this is for you.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's the end of the day when someone is going through difficult feelings, whatever it might be, like that's what you want, right? You want to be seen, you want to be heard, you want to be
Right.
hugged, and
Yeah.
hugged in the metaphorical sense. Doesn't
Hmm.
have to be physical, but can be physical too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Mm. So you had mentioned the up and down game before. I feel like this might be a good place to kind of segue into our care tip. Um,
Sounds great.
yeah. So I just want to, I guess, preface this with like going back to the idea of like behavior with dogs and making space for all of the feelings that dogs have and um, understanding their behavior, but also like recognizing that when they're behaving in a way that we don't like, there can be feelings that the dog has that are uncomfortable and they need help dealing with those feelings. And so the up and down game is a strategy. This comes from Leslie McDevitt, who developed these exercises called pattern games as part of her Control Unleashed program. So pattern games are exercises that involve structured movements that are simple and repetitive and familiar once you practice them a lot, and they're really predictable. So they support the dog in being able to, I guess, manage. The way I think about it is like helps the dog manage their difficult feelings, and I don't love the word regulate for feelings, but in terms of like move through their difficult feelings so that they don't have the big explosive reaction, or like helps the dog engage in a situation where something triggers a difficult feeling, but helps the dog move through it or past it so that they are less reactive.
Yeah, it makes, I mean, that's when I use it. So I can give a little example before you walk us through it. Like I
Yeah.
use it. So Pepper and Biscuit are having trouble being with the cat, with my parents' cat. So they are in a gated area when they're in the main part of the house. And if they see the cat, they might get really dysregulated. They do get really dysregulated.
Yeah.
And that's a cue for me when I actually will go into the gated area and play the up and down game with them for a while. And at first, like they couldn't even stop looking at the cat, but now they've gotten they realize, I think, that the up and down game will help them. And so as soon as I walk in, like they'll just like come right over to me. So it's like an example where I use that. Or Duchess gets dysregulated when someone knocks at the door. So like we'll do the up and down game while that person is coming into the door. So I'm just giving some examples.
Nice. Yeah. Yeah. That's great. I use it in both of those situations. We don't have a cat living with us, but Muggins will see cats on walks sometimes. And so if we see a cat in the distance, we'll stop and do the up and down game.
Yeah.
And also when people come over, we do that like both before I open the door and after I open the door.
Yeah. Yeah. It's just a good way. Well, it also gives them something to do. Like that's also what I was, instead of the reactive behavior.
Exactly. Yeah. Like helps them have like a normal way to behave so that they're not, it's like helps them form a new habit in the situation where they have a habit of like barking or growling or lunging.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Let's do it.
Yeah. So this game is very simple. That's one of the things I love about it, because in these situations of dog reactivity, I get really overwhelmed and then I can't think of what to do. So I really like that this game is just like super simple. So you need some treats for it. So I'm using, my friend Janet has a company called Care Canine, and she makes these chips that are like, they're meat flavored, and they're all like really simple ingredients, like just like beef, chicken, pork. I think this one has sweet potato and blueberries in it also, and that's it. Yeah, super cool. They're like homemade, and Muggins really loves them. So we get the treats, and then what we do is we start by just putting a treat on the floor, and Muggins is napping right now, so I'm going to see if they will get up and try this game with me. So I'm not sure if they will. Hey, so far, so good. Can you get that treat? So if sorry, listeners, I'm waking Muggins up, who's sleeping on the bed, and it takes a couple of treats and luring Muggins with like a trail of treats to get off the bed.
It's the Hansel and Gretel luring.
It is, yes. Come on, your face, they're on the floor now.
Wow.
There
That just would have just hopped right off and gone straight for it.
No, Muggins is like, do I have to? They're gonna wait like as long as they possibly can. So once you have the dog on the floor, what you're gonna do is you're gonna put a treat on the floor right in front of them, and the dog eats it, and then they look at you, and then you put another treat on the floor. And then they eat it, and then they look at you, and then you put another treat on the floor. And that's the whole game. You just keep repeating it. Every time the dog looks at you, you put another treat on the floor. And that piece is really important because the dog is like controlling the game. Every time they look at you, they're telling you to put another treat down. So it gives the dog a lot of control, and it's really repetitive and predictable. And they're also moving their head up and down in this linear motion, like straight line, up and down, up and down. And that gives really calming input to the nervous system through the balance sense. And so those are the reasons why this game is so helpful for like helping dogs to stay calm in situations that are very triggering for their big feelings. And it's also, if you're standing up and doing it like I am, like I'm bending my legs every time I put the treat down, and I'm looking down, and then I stand up, so I straighten my legs and then pick my head up. And so it gives my nervous system really good input also through my balance sense and through my leg muscles. So I stay really calm when I'm doing this.
It's great for your glutes too.
Yeah, exactly. So you can stop the game whenever you want to, or you can let the dog choose to be done with the game. And I like to do both ways because I want the dog to sometimes decide that they're done with something and be able to feel like what that feels like. It's kind of like a self-regulation skill. But also, sometimes I want to stop the game because I have to. Like I have to go do something else, or I run out of treats. And sometimes that can be frustrating for the dog, but it's important that the dog practices being a little frustrated or disappointed, and then having to deal with that. And of course, I help Muggins deal with that by like giving them something to chew on or something else to do when the game is done. So I'll tell Muggins, all done treats. And that helps them know that we're done with the game. And then what I usually do, well, Muggins is gonna go back to sleep, so we're cool there. Or I could give Muggins like a frozen chew or some like snuffle mat or something that they can do on their own. So that way they don't have this like frustration, just like with nothing to do or help them through it.
That was great. Muggins is always a great addition
Yes,
to your
very
demonstrations. Thank you, Muggins. Yeah, I think it's funny. It's simple, but it's brilliant. It really is.
Yeah. Leslie McDevitt's pattern games are exactly that. Super
Yeah.
simple, super brilliant, really helpful.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I find it so helpful. So definitely when you're having a moment with your pup and they're feeling reactive, it's a great go-to.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So that was a really fun episode.
Yes, as always.
Do you have any updates before we sign off for the day?
Oh, updates. Yes, we are moving into Christmas, so lots of Christmas stuff. Woohoo! Holiday stuff for Cloud Doodles.
Awesome.
That is the biggest update I can think of right now because my entire grid is just covered in holiday stuff. So I'm gonna stop there.
That's great.
Do you have any updates?
Yeah, just a reminder that I am available for behavior consulting. So, so if your dog is behaving in a way that you don't like, or is reactive or anxious or aggressive, if you think you have to rehome your dog, or you're scared about having your dog around your kids or other people's kids, um, go ahead and give me a call and I can help you figure out what is going on. I can also offer assessments, like we use the Canine Behavior and Research Questionnaire to understand all the aspects of your dog's behavior, and a canine sensory profile to understand if there is touch sensitivity or sound sensitivity or something like that that could be contributing. These assessments are great for sharing with your veterinarian in case we need to explore underlying medical issues or medication support. And and so what we'll do in that session is we'll go over the assessments and I will help you understand what is going on and why your dog is behaving this way. If you have uncomfortable feelings coming up, I will make space for those and help you with some strategies to move through those. And we will establish safety. So we'll make sure the dog is safe and you are safe and your kids are safe and your guests are safe. We'll have concrete strategies for navigating those situations, and we'll figure out what's the path forward. So should you rehome your dog, or is there something else you can try? Is there a certain type of training that your dog needs, or an environmental adjustment, or medical support? We will answer all of those questions for you.
Thank you so much. And I am currently working with Sharon right now because we adopted 2 new pups, as I mentioned. And that's also another great reason to work with Sharon to help sort of facilitate the transition of having new beings in your home. So that's been a great help. So thank you, Sharon. And we'll see you guys next time. We'll be covering a new topic, and we have yet to know what it is, but follow our Instagram and at happydog_happyhuman, and you can get more information there about our upcoming episodes, and just also little bits of information on we have different graphics and reels, and yeah, just more fun content for you in a different way. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Have a great day. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to support the show, go to buymeacoffee.com/HDHH podcast and send us a few bucks so that we can stay awake and energized to make more content.
Even though we are licensed professionals in our own field of work, Angela, LCSW, Sharon, OTD, and CDBC, this podcast is not intended to replace individual therapy for humans or behavior support for dogs. We approach our conversations from an exploratory, observational, and strictly personal lens. If you are struggling with your mental health, your dog's behavior, or if you or your dog have experienced a recent traumatic event, please see the resources section on our websites for a list of resources and places that can help. Visit either www.hc-collab.com/happydoghappyhuman or www.clouddoodles.com/happydoghappyhuman. This podcast is made possible by the collaboration between Cloud Doodles and Human Canine Collaborative. Check out our websites at www.clouddoodles.com or www.hc-collab.com. Special thanks to Tom Fox for support with editing and production consulting. You can find Tom at tomfoxphotos.com. Special thanks to Muggins, Duchess, Pepper, and Biscuit for sound effects and story examples. We could not and would not ever want to do this without you.